So, yeah, welcome everybody. And this is Shauna, who's the president and founder of Wildwood. And she's going to talk about a lot of things, including this wonderful chicken here named Lark.
Well, thank you for coming out. So, like I was telling Kathy, I do better with questions. I'm not a great just public speaker because I'm usually behind the scenes working with the animals. So, yes, my name is Shauna, and I'm the founder and president of Wildwood Farm Sanctuary. Thank you for coming out. What is this? How many years have we been partnering with you to?
It's been about 5 or 6 now.
Yeah, we did it in the winter a couple times.
Yeah, a couple of times with our overcoats on in the wind tunnels.
So, yeah, I can tell you a little bit of history real quick. So, long story short, we opened up Wildwood Farm Sanctuary around 2011, started taking in animals. This was my grandparents' farm. I also work as a veterinary technician. So I've been working with animals pretty much my whole life, like out here on the farm, became a vet tech. I did a little bit of wildlife rehab. And so when our family moved out here around 2008, I'm like, okay, well, what can I do with this property? How can I continue to help animals? And so it started out very small, taking in a couple chickens needing rescue. I work as a vet tech, so of course I began taking in animals from where I work. At that time, we were 99% working with farmers. That included dairy farms, chicken farms, you name it. We worked with farmers. So I got a lot of experience working with farm animals. But the difference was when I was out here on my grandparents' farm, I had no idea how most farms treated their animals, how people got their meat. So my grandparents had cows out here, and then we raised them, and then I didn't know what happened to them after that. I just know they had a great life. So fast forward, I started working as a vet tech and working with some of these farms. I got to see, like, go on the dairy farms, go on the chicken farms, and really see what happens. I was shocked. Like many people, I thought that all farm animals lived on these idyllic farms, red barns, happy life. Well, then what happens in the end happens. It's not that way. So that also prompted me to open up Wildwood. Like I said, it started very small. I took in some chickens. I thought we were going to sell vegan cupcakes at Safeway, and then it just really grew and grew and grew. And then we began having volunteers and events out here. And so my main goal and the goal of our organization is to not only rescue farm animals, but tell their stories and tell where they came from, because you can rescue as many farm animals as you want, just keep taking them in. But the thing is, we want to stop that. We want to stop that cycle. We want to tell people that if you're eating meat, most likely that meat is coming from these giant factory farms, chicken farms. Or you're drinking dairy, comes from dairy farms. And it's not a pretty picture. They're not treated well, unfortunately. Lark. This is our newest little rescue. We're not sure if Lark is a she or a he. And we take in rescues like Lark. So long story short is, I don't know if you guys heard on the news, about 3 or 4 weeks ago in Portland, there was a semi that was going around Twilliger curves and flipped over. And it was loaded with chickens. So basically they stack them up in all these crates. Usually there's no protection. They're flying down I-5. I can't believe they don't wreck more, because usually they're double, triple deckers. So anyway, I think maybe it's happened in Portland before. So they was on that particular truck when it flipped over. I didn't hear anything about it. I got a call from an activist friend and said, I have one of those chickens. And I said, well, I don't even know what you're talking about. What happened? And she's like, that from that wreck. I don't know what happened. So basically all the chickens were thrown off the truck. And some of them were thrown over the embankment, landed in the bushes. I believe most of them died. And a friend of mine, she actually climbed over the side of the embankment and found her and rescued her. I think he's the only one that survived that. So we immediately took her to Dove Lewis Veterinary Emergency Hospital, have her checked out for internal injuries before we did anything. Took her there, they checked her out. We got an okay from the state vet that it was okay that we brought her here, because that's very important. as much as you want to rescue animals, by law you can't go in and just take them because you'll get in trouble. So she's been here since then. So when I got her, she was about 42 days of age, and she weighed over 7 pounds. And if anybody has ever had chickens before, raised chicks, they don't get that big. They just don't get that big, and so they're still babies. And so so chickens raised like Lark are usually debeaked and detoed about 2 days after they're hatched. So again, she would have been born in a huge hatchery, no contact with her mom, just incubated, hatched out, 2 days of age, debeak them, detow them without any anesthetic, and then send them off to the farms to be raised. So with her, when she flew off the chicken truck, she was headed for slaughter. So she's the only one that survived. So she acts like a baby still, because when we got her, all she wanted to do was, even though she was 7 pounds and looks like an adult, she wanted to cuddle under my wing, she thought. And so that's what she peeps. She sounds like a baby. So I hate to say, but these are broiler chickens. Like, she would be like Foster Farm chicken, Tyson chicken. They're all treated the same way. They only live for 42 days, then they're done. They don't even get a chance.
And she did escape getting debeaked and detoed. Like
Yeah,
her feet are very big.
Yeah, some of the birds we have taken in, it's a horrible sight. They debeak them. I don't want to be graphic, but they do slice off the ends of their beaks with a laser. They remove their toes, basically like a cat that's getting declawed. They cut off the first digits, and so they have no nail. And they basically do that because when they're on the farms being raised for 42 days, they're so confined and so cramped, they will literally kill each other by pecking each other, scratching each other, and fighting. So that's why those big farms do that, is so they won't do that to each other.
And you have some birds down there.
We have 2 turkeys, Olive and Libby, the white girls. And they're another example. We call them Thanksgiving turkeys. They're different. They're broad-breasted, and if you look at their feet, that they have, like, their toes have been seared off, their beaks, but they do very well. So our sanctuary really specializes in taking these special animals that need special care, and they get to live out their lives here. It can be a struggle. Even though I'm a vet tech, I utilize a lot of the veterinary hospitals, the Avian Medical Center. We're there almost twice a week because these birds require so much care. And also what's sad is she probably had never seen sunlight before she was put on that truck for transportation to slaughter. They're kept in dark sheds, temperature controlled. It's a factory farm. So she just didn't get to see much sunlight.
Did you say she's 42 days today?
She's probably, the day she was found, she was probably around 42 days of age. So we've had her about 3 weeks, I think. And she's been to the avian vet twice. Once after she'd been taken to Dove Lewis, we took her again to the Avian Medical Center to have her looked at again, because she still wasn't walking right, because she was obviously thrown from the truck. That's the kind of thing they just really cover up. You don't hear about it, obviously, unless it's on I-5 during rush hour. So it happens a lot. You will hear stories about animals falling off transport trucks, trucks tipping over. There's a lot of care. There's a lot of care. So we can't just put her in with all of our other regular chickens. She will basically eat and eat and eat, and that's thanks to people breeding birds like Lark to just genetically, all they want to do is eat. They have 42 days to gain as much weight as possible because that's all they're going to live for. And so they never outgrow that desire to eat. So we do have to carefully monitor their diets, keep them apart from our regular turkeys and chickens. But if we can, give them a great life for maybe even 5 more years, that's a lot longer than 42 days. And they're the sweetest birds. They love people. You would think that they hate people.
And that raises an issue too about how a lot of your animals are older now, because they don't normally she's still a baby, but a lot of your animals are way past when they would have been slaughtered.
So many of the animals that we've taken in, like 2014, well, all of our animals are getting up there in age. Our goats, our steers. So that in itself presents a problem. Well, not a problem, but situations where even the veterinarians we work with, they're like, we don't know how to treat this, like Ferd, one of our steers that you saw. He's ginormous. He's huge. He came from a dairy farm. The bull calves are sold off for veal. Maybe they live 3 months at most. Well, Ferd is 10 years old. So he's going to begin to have arthritis, bone degeneration. And so when we have veterinarians come out here, they're like, well, we're not sure how to treat Ferd because we don't normally treat steers that are this old. And so we really try to work with our veterinarians on getting a good treatment plan. But some of the veterinarians just don't know either. They don't know. They deal with farm animals from agriculture. They would see Ferd until he's like 2 months old and that's it. So we have our biggest expense is probably veterinary care and feed and hay. So and all of our animals are rescues. We don't take in owner surrenders. We do try to help people find homes for their farm animals, but we try to leave our space open for, let's say, Lark that fell off the truck.
And you probably have a lot of requests from people who had chickens, backyard chickens, right? And then they stopped laying eggs, and so they don't want them anymore.
Right. So during the pandemic, everybody got backyard chickens. Everybody wanted hens, lay their eggs, and then they also realized that, wow, they need special care too, just like dogs and cats. So then we started getting a lot of calls from people after the pandemic. Well, we have hens, we don't want them anymore. Now we're ready to go do things and travel. So there was a lot of the sanctuaries heard that, a lot of influx. So again, we try to pair up people that, we always encourage people to adopt because chickens are wonderful. And they are great companions long after they've stopped laying too. So we try to help people connect to other people that wanted to adopt. Any questions?
And you're currently potentially looking for a new site for Wildwood, right?
Yes, we are. So like I said, we started in 2011, started out very small, and we have outgrown our current property. I live here, so it's just made it kind of difficult to have a lot of events here. We're not really zoned to have a lot of events. We have a busy road, and we really wanted to expand our educational component. We wanted to have interns out here, more events like this, more tours, cooking classes, and we can't do that out here. And we really are at capacity for how many animals we can take in. We're also a nature preserve, but it's about 95% of our property, so we can't expand out. And so we're looking for property, hopefully in this area. So this is about 98 acres, so we'd love to get something about that size that is more for just farm animals like fields, so they have more space, and for us to do more educational activities. So we started looking about a year ago, and property is pretty expensive, especially out here, thanks to our wineries. And it may not end up being out here. We may go closer, like Oregon City has some really nice properties, but it is pretty specific what we need, what we're looking for.
You have a question?
Oh yeah.
I had a question.
Okay.
So do you neuter the turkeys and the roosters? No?
No, we don't. I don't think we have. Well, okay, so they do lay eggs, and they try to hide them, but it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt around here in the spring. We go looking for them, but no, I don't know of any safe way to neuter a turkey, or so it's just keeping everybody kind of separate during the spring, and following and watching them if they're going to lay eggs. So all of our other, like our steers, we've had them neutered. Our goats, we have them neutered. As much as I know, we don't have any babies, and that's kind of the goal.
Yeah.
But no, we don't have any. We don't breed any of our animals. We don't take any of our animals off site. Sometimes we've gotten requests for that, like, hey, can you bring one of the chickens to schools or off, and it's just really stressful. So our animals, we feel, have already been through so much in their lives. They've been used so much. So there is that balance of education, visitation, and keeping them having a peaceful and happy life, and not using them. So I think every farm sanctuary has to try to find that balance. And we do get the question, why aren't you guys open more often? Why aren't you guys? Well, it's for our animals. It's their home. They get a little upset, they get stressed out, and so we don't want them necessarily to put them on display, especially as we love having the public out. But then again, if we move to another property, we can have more organized events. Like we used to have a bingo event out here. We have this event, so there is just that balance of having people out, sharing their stories, visiting, and then leaving them alone to live their lives out here. So
Is she gonna grow into her feet?
I
She's got big
Yeah,
feet.
she has big feet.
she might get taller, but no, those feet. So she was genetically bred to have feet that size to hold up her weight.
Yeah.
But still, after a certain age, on the chicken farms, their bodies will give out. They'll just eat, and get so big that they become, they just can't walk at all. So she's enjoying visiting.
Does she mind being
I don't think so.
How many animals do you have?
We probably have around 60 now.
You don't have any horses though.
No horses, no. I think horses are pretty specialized, and we have a lot of horse rescues in the area. And I don't think our property is well suited for horses. I think we need more of a flat area. But I love horses, and we don't have pigs either. And again, I know a lot of sanctuaries who they're specially designed for pigs. Pigs are they can lift up these fences and take off. So
Who's the oldest animal?
the oldest animal is probably Smokey. He's one of our goats. He has like no teeth. He was 8 years old when he got here, and that was in 2015.
Oh.
And so, like Smokey, most of our animals are under special care because they're geriatric. They get special feed, special hay, special veterinary care. He's probably our oldest.
Like 15.
Yeah, goats could live to be about 20 or so. But surprisingly, I was talking to Kathy about this. Somebody recently, there was a quote like, what is the animal that is the most consumed on the planet? I think somebody asked me that and I said, well, of course it's chickens.
Yeah.
I said, no, it's goats.
Ooh.
hmm
Wow.
Goats
The
are the
most?
number one consumed farm animal on the planet. And people raise goats around here. They raise Boer goats. You'd be surprised for goat meat. And they live maybe only 4 years or so, if that. It's very common. Yeah, it surpasses chickens.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I will be around if you want to talk to me. I can tell you more. So, and I think it's Erin's
Yeah, I
turn.
think it's
Erin
Erin's.
is one of our amazing volunteers, and she's an amazing activist. And definitely want to hear her story. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Hello. I'm gonna read off some notes on my phone if that's all right. It's just I just got back from traveling, so I'm a little jet lagged a little bit, I think. But yeah, my name is Erin Wing, and I have been involved in animal advocacy since 2017. And I am a former undercover investigator of animal cruelty. And over the course of my career as an undercover investigator, I investigated about 4 different animal farming facilities. And I am currently the Deputy Director of Investigations at Animal Outlook, which is a national nonprofit that is based in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. And our work primarily focuses on conducting undercover investigations of farms and slaughterhouses across the country. And in this work, our investigators will work at these animal production facilities, and they'll document the day-to-day process and day-to-day operations, as well as any abuses committed against animals, to gather visual evidence, to share with the public and consumers so that everyone can know the impact of animal farming on animals, people, and the environment. And we also use the legal system to advocate for farmed animals to be protected under the law, and for the courts in our country to recognize when these animals are being abused and hold the corporations that perpetuate their mistreatment and benefit the most from the exploitation of these animals, and hold them accountable for their actions. So that's one of the most important points of the work that we do, is that a lot of laws that are existing in this country protect companion animals. There is little to no protection for farmed animals at all. So that gives a lot of these animal farming facilities the wherewithal to make up their own rules and govern themselves. And so that's where animal protection organizations like Animal Outlook step in to make sure that, you know, these animal farming facilities aren't allowed to just do whatever they want and treat these animals that are capable of feeling pain and, you know, capable of, you know, expressing a variety of different emotions, and they're sentient, that they are recognized as deserving of protections in our society. We also, through these efforts, we hope to basically propel this nation closer to a future where suffering for the sake of profit is no longer the norm, and consumers can choose more compassionate options by ultimately leaving these animal products off of their plates and refusing to support these exploitative and ultimately harmful businesses like animal farming. So for me, this was the most important work that I could do, specifically because animal protection work has so much to do with protecting the planet and also people as well, everyone who inhabits it. And I wanted to do something that would affect the most positive change. Because for me, when I was growing up and all throughout sort of my formative years and all the way up until I was in my early 20s, I didn't like what was happening in this world and felt that I couldn't do much about it, because there are so many major issues, and we see it especially nowadays, that we're facing. And over time, those issues seem to expand year after year, whether it has to do with climate change, whether it has to do with human rights violations, animal abuse on farms. And with all of that, you know, and facing that as a young person growing up in this world, I definitely did feel helpless and lost in a way. And I felt like I was powerless to do anything to help change the world for the better. And I was essentially just this poor kid who was growing up in the inner city, honestly. I come from New York, I lived in New Jersey for a little bit, and then eventually I was in Florida for about 10 years, and all in low-income areas, in inner city areas, and my family was the type that was basically struggling to survive. And what I remember really vividly about that time period in my life was that where I was living, there weren't grocery stores that were within walking distance. If you wanted to go and get fresh produce, you had to have some sort of vehicle. And for any family that didn't have a vehicle, it was pretty much, you know, what are the options that are nearby that we can walk to, because we can't afford a vehicle, right? So I really remember in those areas, fast food restaurants were on every corner. And grocery stores that were like in gas stations, where you're going to see a lot of highly processed food products that are really oversaturated with animal products. And anything remotely healthy that I had in my diet came from a can. So canned vegetables, things like that, with a lot of preservatives. mass-produced and poorly regulated animal products masquerading as these cheap alternatives in essentially what are these urban food deserts to tempt desperate caregivers and parents into looking for quick ways to feed their hungry kids after long work hours naturally just became a staple in my diet. And the hidden health risks in the form of high blood pressure, heart disease, and more were just lurking behind these dollar menus and 4-for-4 meal deals. And that was my existence as a child. I couldn't really fathom at the time how imposing the long fingers of animal agriculture were as they essentially tore through the fragile existences of myself, my family, and fellow members of my community. I remember looking at all of these surroundings and what I had as far as options were to basically, sustain ourselves and feed ourselves. And I was just wondering, why are things like this? Why are these fast food restaurants just setting up on every corner in these cities where it's basically like it's either you go there or you're gonna have to like take 2 buses to get to the nearest grocery store? And would that situation ever change in the near future where people in these areas can have more nutritious options, more choice in their lives? I also remember when I was younger, I was really, I had a strong desire to be tapped into all the most important news in our world. And I had a really, I was really compelled to just know as much as I could about what was going on in the world around us. And one of the things that really interested me was documentaries. So I watched a bunch of documentaries, and that was essentially how I got sort of clued into, all of these issues that affect our world in a variety of different ways. And some of those documentaries were about our food system. And that was where, I would see undercover investigations footage. And I was the type of kid that forced my parents, and I was like, hey, we need to all sit down and watch this. I want to watch this together with you. Because I think in a way I was also trying to sort of like compel them to maybe see a different perspective on our world. And for me, I just soaked in everything. So I really wanted to be able to help influence my parents to sort of do the same and be more open-minded. And we would sit down and watch these documentaries, and I remember seeing the undercover investigations footage and being disgusted and so depressed after watching what those animals were going through. And then when I would sit down and eat a meal with my family with chicken meat or cow meat or something like that, I would feel awful, honestly. I knew I was perpetuating this harm in a way. And, as a kid, you're just going to eat whatever's put in front of you. But I would still feel this guilt and sort of like I was condoning all of this because I was consuming the flesh of those animals. And I knew I was sort of perpetuating this harm, but it was really common in my family for us all to know how awful animals were being treated and continue eating it anyway. And it became sort of like this cycle for me. And I would feel awful for eating animals, then eventually forget about it. And then I'd see another documentary, another clip from an undercover investigation, and then I'd feel awful all over again. And I think to myself, why am I eating this? I really don't want to participate in this. And then I was just stuck in this cycle of guilt and grief, and I didn't know how to really break out at the time. Then when I was in my early 20s, I met the first vegan person I'd ever met in my life. And she told me just flat out, without going into the specifics of, us having these long conversations about, our perspectives on, world issues and things like that. But basically she told me if I did want to do something to help make the world a better place that I should be vegan. And that was what made it click for me, is that influence from someone who had this different perspective and was really supportive of, you know, helping me to transition my diet. And it wasn't easy. It was very daunting because I was so used to, you know, going to the grocery store and knowing exactly what to get to eat. And I remember, you know, going into grocery stores after I made that decision to change my diet and not really knowing what to get. But I was really lucky at the time because there were some vegan alternatives in grocery stores, which I'm thankful for. I really give major props to people who went vegan way back when, in the 70s, 80s, because it was a lot harder. But being vegan in my family wasn't really a thing, right? So that was the other factor in my journey to sort of transitioning my diet. Whatever we had served to us in my household, it was essentially considered a blessing because the next meal wasn't promised. But I had all of these values that I inherently, you know, adopted, and I cultivated those values myself. And I knew that I was fed up with feeling like I didn't have a choice. So I tried my best to at least be vegetarian. And then I ended up wanting to do more than that. So I'm the type of person that feels like I have this, I'm compelled to heed that call to action, and I just run headfirst into it, and I want to do the most extreme thing, the most impactful thing, and the thing that is the most difficult, that is going to be the most taxing, the most I think the most challenging. And so that was what led me to apply to become an undercover investigator at Animal Outlook. And the day I stepped into that role and officially started doing investigations work, I went vegan just that day. And it was that easy for me. And what I was told, which totally made sense to me at the time, was that if I am advocating for these animals to be treated with respect and for people to abstain from consuming products derived from them, that I had to support them, and I couldn't be complicit by consuming products made from their, you know, meat or their whatever, you know, things that they produce. So that was an easy choice for me, and I went straight into the field of undercover work. And then I did my first undercover investigation at a chicken farm in Virginia. And if anyone knows anything about Virginia, it is really just heavy with animal agriculture, specifically chicken farms. Tyson used to, I'm not sure if they still do off the top of my head, but they used to have multiple plants. I think one of them recently closed down, but Tyson is a really heavy operator there. You also have Amick, Foster Farms, I think, operates there as well. It's just, if you drive through Temperanceville, you will see a chicken farm pretty much everywhere you look. And the smell when you drive in there is just insane. It's like nothing you would ever believe. I know that the PDX VEG challenge had a chicken day challenge, and I really like that because a lot of people tend to think that chicken meat is a better alternative for the environment, and the chickens aren't as, you know, mistreated, or whatever misconceptions people might have about that. And, you know, I don't put it so much on the people as much as I do on the industry, because there are advertisements everywhere. We see them every single day, and essentially it's trying to convince people to, you know, oh, Chick-fil-A, you know, with the advertisements of the cows saying eat more chicken. Like that's an example of what influences us to make these sort of choices with our diets. But having worked on a chicken farm, I can definitely tell you that it is not a better alternative, especially when it comes to how they care for their animals, or the absence of care, I should say, that they, you know, do with these animals. I think Shauna did mention that chickens that are farmed for their meat have a short life cycle, and that Lark was rescued at about 42 days old. So yeah, about 45 to 47 days. That's the end of their life cycle within the chicken industry. And for me, when I first stepped foot on a chicken farm, I had no idea what to expect. One of the things that really shocked me was when I stepped into one of those sheds that Shauna was talking about earlier, and I saw just how many chickens were in that shed. When she said that they barely have any room to move, when they're in the late stages of their life cycle, it's really like they are just packed in. They can barely spread their wings. And you can imagine that if you have, just 2 workers on this farm site, which was the case for the farm that I worked on, how are these people going to manage thousands and thousands of chickens per shed? At this particular chicken farm I worked on, there were 9 sheds, and let's say 20,000 chickens per shed. That's astronomical numbers. And I would just see all of them spread all the way out to the end of the shed, where you can barely see the end of the shed, and it's just a sea of them. So when you have just a couple of workers maintaining these sheds with all the chickens in them, how are they going to keep track of which chickens die? How many of them die? At what day do they die? So you have a lot of these chickens that are dying off, and they're staying in the sheds with the chickens who are alive. Not only that, but it's always surprising to people when I tell them inside these sheds there's no enrichment. All they have is bowls filled with feed, and the feed gets pumped out constantly because they have to eat round the clock, and they have little water spouts that they can go up to and drink water. There are no, there's no barn like this, or there aren't any like hay bales for them to even jump on. They can't dust bathe, which is very natural behavior for them. They can't do any of that. And the floors that they walk on, they're going to the bathroom like right where they stand. I remember stepping on those floors and bugs just crawling all over the place. And this is where they live 24/7. They're never allowed outside, never allowed to feel even, grass on their feet, or to even feel sunlight. And that's their entire existence. And with them packed in so tightly in those sheds, it's just ammonia fumes just all through those sheds. And workers going into those sheds, for me, I worked at this chicken farm for about 6 or 7 weeks. And the first couple of days I worked there, I found it really hard to breathe. And my breath was my breathing was extremely raspy. And I felt, I was definitely going to have health complications after that. And now to this day, I recently found out that I got diagnosed with asthma not too long ago. So I can't run anymore. Like, I have to be careful what physical activities I do. And that's going to affect me for the rest of my life. And that's just, I feel like that's not even the worst of it. There are many other workers that also, suffer to some degree with health complications after their work on animal farms. And with respect to just a few of the other conditions that I was able to see at this chicken farm, of course, with these chickens who aren't able to say, hey, that hurts, or really vocalize their pain in a way that the workers can understand, these workers are looking at these chickens like they're products on a production line. So any chicken who was deformed or too weak to stand and go access food, or if they were injured in some way, or even if they weren't growing fast enough, that was enough for them to be killed off by the workers. And they would not receive any veterinary care at all. So it was either they lived and they grew and they turned a profit, or they were seen as disposable by the workers. And then just to touch on how, I guess, how interconnected different struggles are and different issues in our society, how interconnected it is with animal advocacy issues. The workers too, at this facility where these sentient beings who have the capacity to feel pain are being mistreated in this way. You can only imagine that that's going to extend to the workers as well. If they're working long hours round the clock in this horrible environment where they're going to experience health complications. There was one worker I was working with. He was living on a trailer on the farm site, and there was no door on his trailer. He had no bathroom in there. He was exposed to the elements when he was sleeping. Wild animals would just come into his trailer. He couldn't get a good night's sleep. If it was cold, raining, all of that went into his trailer. If it was extremely hot, he had no AC or air conditioning, central air, or anything like that. And if he even needed to take a shower, he had to go and essentially beg the farm owner to let him take a shower. And it just really it just drives home the callousness that is pervasive in this industry. Of course, when you're going to mistreat, living beings, that's going to extend to other living beings that you see as not as important or less than. And for me, that was really emotional as the descendant of immigrants, where a lot of migrant workers are going to be taking these jobs, because what other alternatives are there nowadays? So it was really heartbreaking to see that, but it was really influential in me sort of understanding or having a better understanding of what else animal suffering connects to in our world. So another interesting thing that I wanted to touch on very briefly was that I conducted that investigation 5 years ago, right? Just about. Just recently, Animal Outlook released a new undercover investigation, and it was at a chicken farm in Virginia that was contracted to Tyson. And wouldn't you know it, when some people say, maybe they've gotten better, maybe things are different now, the conditions were the absolute same, if not worse in some ways. At this particular farm, some chickens weren't even allowed to access water. And these were chickens who were really young, about this big. And one of the most heartbreaking things that we saw during that investigation was the water lines, the water spouts, they're kept on this pipe, and it extends all the way from the beginning to the end of the shed. And there's a pulley system that all the workers have to do is either lower it or raise it. But if there are chicks that aren't growing fast enough, it doesn't matter to them. So if these chicks aren't growing fast enough and the water line is yay high and everybody else can access it, we saw some chicks who were jumping up, struggling to try to get just a drink of water. And that was one of the most heartbreaking things I think I've ever seen in an investigation that we've done. So I want to sort of move on to another investigation I think is really interesting too, and just paints a broader picture about how serious this problem is. And that was the fish farm investigation that I conducted in Maine. And this was a very interesting investigation for me because it really spoke to just the problem not existing primarily with the workers, right? This is a problem that comes from the top down. You have these corporations that are profiting off of the suffering of these animals. And then I really like to emphasize that when it comes to talking about animal exploitation and animal suffering, you really have to look at the big players there. And it was really apparent to me when I conducted this investigation, because when I was at this fish farm, a lot of people think that fish don't feel pain because they can't vocalize. If they do experience pain, a lot of people try to say that their body movements are just physical reactions, that like they're just muscle spasms, right? And a lot of people have this idea, right? When I was at this fish farm working alongside these workers, a fish farm that, you know, when you think about chicken farming and how big that farm was, fish farming is a whole other different scenario. Like, there were tanks, I think, you know, over 300 tanks, 10,000 fish per tank. No enrichment in these tanks, just water and feed that gets sprayed in every now and then. And these fish are just swimming in concentric circles, and that's their entire life until they grow to specific stages of life and they get put in different tanks, and they go from tank to tank, and then eventually they grow to a size where they are taken to saltwater open net pens, that I don't know if some of you've seen them, but sometimes they're placed in the path of wild fish migration paths, which is a huge problem as well. But this is essentially the situation that I was walking into. I had no idea what to expect. I hadn't ever set foot on a fish farm before, and I didn't know how the workers would react to these fish. But I worked alongside people who had been working with these fish for about, I'd say 10 years, 5 years or so. And what was really interesting about these people was that I was working alongside workers who were apologizing to these fish for accidentally hurting them in some way. One of the tasks that we had at this facility was scraping out fungus from the tanks, because fungus infections were a huge issue in these tanks, because these fish are just kept in these tanks 24/7, and a lot of them would die off in huge numbers, you know, 10,000 fish per, per shed where the tanks were kept in, and probably more. And while the workers were scraping out the fungus from the tanks, I was working alongside one of them, and we were scraping fungus out of a tank that had really small baby fish in them, so it was really easy to injure them. And anytime the worker maybe accidentally injured one of the baby fish and essentially, you know, really severely hurt them, to the point where they would probably end up dying, he was just saying to them, almost like a whisper, like he didn't want to be hurt, but "I'm sorry." And that was the first time I'd ever heard anyone apologize to any farmed animal before. And they were fish. So that was really eye-opening to me. And it really just, it drove home that these people, you know, all of the workers I interacted with, they were decent people. Like, most of them were kind. And it just really drives home to me that, you know, evil sometimes is an action, but it's not a state of being. And I don't think it can be, because I think we all have the capacity to be better, to do better, and to make better choices. But when they're put in these environments where their primary objective is to look at these animals as products, then this is a situation where they're going to adapt to the environment that they're in. And a lot of these workers, I would interact with them and they would be kind. I didn't really have any problems. There was the occasional worker who would just be violent, just to be violent. And sometimes there are people like that. But most of these workers were really, you know, I didn't really have issues with them. In fact, a lot of people wonder sometimes, you know, if I ever had a situation where anyone might have thought that I was an undercover investigator and I might have been found out. And usually I say I never really had an issue like that, but there was one time where I thought there might have been an issue like that. And it's a funny situation because I was having car trouble the day before, and I showed up to my shift. I sat down in the break room, and then I'm talking with one of the workers, and mind you, this is Maine, this is New England. So he turns to me and he says, "What happened with the cow?" And I go, "Huh?" Because I did conduct a dairy investigation before I got to that fish farm. So many things were running through my head, because I thought he was saying, "What happened to the cow?" I thought he was trying to catch me slipping up or something. And I just asked him, "Huh?" And he says, "What happened with the cow?" And then I felt my heart beating so fast. And then it took me just a couple more seconds until I realized that he was asking what happened to the car. And because of his New England accent, northern Maine, I misheard, and that was the most, tense moment I ever had. But it was a casual conversation, right? So it just goes to show that, I think that it's a huge issue with animal suffering, with regards to animal suffering, and there are a lot of different perpetrators we can look at. But essentially, we really have to concentrate on those major corporations that are raking in huge profits off the backs of these workers, who would otherwise, would they be doing this if they had other options? And I think the last thing that I'll say about this fish farm investigation, and something that was really telling, was a conversation I had on one of the last days I was working there with a manager. And I was looking at a bucket where a whole bunch of fish, live fish, were put inside that bucket. And the bucket didn't have any water in it. And they were slowly suffocating to death because of that. And I was looking into this bucket at these fish slowly dying. And a manager comes and walks over to me and he says, "It's really rough, the way we kill them. It used to really bum me out because they just suffocate." And then he says, over the years, though, you kind of get desensitized. And that was, I think, I usually bring that up because I think it's the most indicative of the huge issue that we have with animal farming, that we're so desensitized to it, that the advertisements make it seem like it's not so bad. You have workers that have to hurt these animals in many different ways every single day because it's a part of standard procedures, standard operations at these farms. And after 5 years, it sort of all becomes normal. And I don't want to live in a world where violence and suffering is normal. So now, instead of sitting down and feeling guilty every time I sit down for a meal, I feel absolutely no guilt. I just get the nutrition, and I don't have to wonder if my meal was produced from the suffering of others, because I don't want to be a part of it. I've seen what it's like. I've been there on these farms, and I know what the truth is about animal farming. And I never want to go back to being a participant in that. And I don't have to wonder if my meal was either produced from the suffering of others, if it polluted a rural area, or if it caused some workers irreparable mental and physical harm. The last thing I'll say here is, recently I went with my partner on vacation to San Francisco, and we went to the Asian Art Museum. And we saw this installation by an artist called Bernice Bing. And her notes were also on display. She was a painter. And one of her notes, she just wrote a sentence, and it said, "I cannot change this world. I can only change myself." And I won't say that if you go vegan today, all these problems are going to go away, and it all depends on you. But when you go and interact with these animals, I want you to think about your connection with them on this planet that we share together, and think about your role in their lives and how we all see them and treat them. And I can't tell you what to do. I really don't advocate that way. I don't tell people how to live their lives, but I will tell you that you have a choice. And that's always what I say. We all have a choice. I see suffering, and I see a choice to make, to help perpetuate this harm or play a part in dismantling it. For me, I was ready to say at some point, enough is enough. And I chose to break out of this harmful cycle and choose compassion. And that's what I choose every single day. And I'm thankful that I had the choice and recognized the choice that I had to do that. And now when I interact with these animals, I know that I'm a friend to them, and it's one of the greatest feelings in the world, where you can do that and just have this connection with them and know that it is completely positive. So I'm thankful for sanctuaries. I'm thankful for being able to do the work that I can do, and thankful for having the chance to talk to you all here. So thanks for listening.
Thanks so much.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I read Animal Liberation by Peter Singer when I was 9. So I was like, I've been awake for a long time. A couple of things. What did you do with the conclusion of the investigation? Well, first of all, did you take pictures and videos? And then what did you do with the information? Like, was it reported or, you know? And second is, what would have happened if you had been caught? What would have been the consequences?
Yeah, those are really
understand
good
me?
questions. Sorry?
You understand me okay?
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
that's excellent.
Those are really good questions. So, first of the questions was how did I document things, and what happened at the conclusion of the investigation. So for my organization, and some organizations have different goals, right? They're effective in different ways. For Animal Outlook, we gather evidence on farms, and it's mostly all the time it's visual evidence, so it's videos, maybe it'll be some photos, but we're documenting visual evidence, and sometimes there's audio in it depending on the state that we're in and what the laws allow. But we operate within the law to document any suffering or mistreatment that animals are going through, and also to document some standard practices as well, because a lot of standard practices also cause harm to animals, but a lot of these farms get a pass because they're making up their own rules, and there aren't really many laws at all that protect farmed animals from any sort of, pain that farms will put them through. So we're documenting the standard practices and the day-to-day operations, as well as any cruelty or abuse, workers hitting animals and things like that. And then we take all of that information and we go straight to law enforcement and we say, hey, this farm is doing all of these things to these animals. This is the corporation that is that this farm is contracted to, because a lot of the time there is a contract between the farm and like a Tyson or Foster Farms or Hormel or those larger companies. And we basically tell law enforcement, hey, these are all the things that we documented here. Can you please enforce the law here? And there are some laws that we try to use to protect these animals, to advocate for their safety, and that these farms need to be held accountable for what they're doing to them. So that's essentially what we try to do when we communicate with law enforcement. We try to make the legal system work for these animals. Another thing that's really important about the work that we do, another component of it, is outreach and education. So we post these videos online so that anybody can access it anywhere in the world, and they can see what is going on these farms that are producing animal products. And as consumers, they can be informed to maybe, not support this particular industry, or maybe decide to make a more compassionate choice and completely remove animals from their diet, because at the end of the day, if you cut out one sector of the industry, you're going to probably see an undercover investigation that reveals that another sector of the industry is also harmful in a variety of different ways. So usually I say, instead of going through the headache of trying to decide which company should I buy from, it's a wash. It's a lot better to look at, some veggie alternatives, vegan alternatives, and stick with that, because you have less of a headache there, and you don't have to worry about, whether you're supporting, a particular company that is abusing their animals. So I think, I might have answered all your questions. I'm not sure.
It was also the question about what would have happened to you if you'd been
What are the consequences if you had been caught?
Yeah, so, I mean, considering that we do everything legally, there aren't really that many consequences that I'm looking at when it comes to, legal ramifications, because we operate within the law, and we try to do that to show that what we're doing is legitimate. People should just and have the right to know and deserve to know what's happening on these farm sites, and we'll do whatever we can within the law to obtain that information and share it with the public, and then seek justice for these animals. As far as just like personal, potential personal harm that might have come to me, you know, I was a female investigator, right? And I was on farms working primarily with men. And, you know, most of the time I was the only female worker at these places. So it was definitely, I try not to make light of that because it's a really serious, you know, risk in some cases. But you also never know, you know, what situation you're walking into. But what a lot of animal protection organizations try to do is look out for investigators. So if there's ever a risk or a potential situation where, you know, someone might be discovered or something like that, we usually try to avoid that risk because, yeah, we don't like to, you know, put ourselves in harm's way in a way that is sort of reckless for the individual who is putting themselves in that position to do this important work. And we want to have them, you know, do it for as long as they can. So safety is a priority when it comes to undercover work.
What about the ag gag laws?
Ag laws are a headache. I do not like them because it's essentially suppression, right? If we want to know what's going on these farm sites, we have a right to know. And if farms or animal agriculture is claiming to be transparent and claiming to say, you know, I'm going to tell you that these animals are okay and they have one bad day, but I don't want you to look at the reality of the situation. I don't want you to look in my farm. I don't want you to take pictures of my animals. I don't want you anywhere near my farm. And it's because they know, I mean, they have strategies within the industry of how to advertise to people to influence us to eat more animal products. It's a whole business and it's all dependent on profit. That's all that matters to them. So, you know, nonprofit organizations like us, we have to, you know, skirt around these ag laws and find opportunities where we can operate legally and investigate these farms in states where there isn't that suppression. But it's a huge issue, and it's something that I think we as, you know, voters should really be aware of, and we should definitely challenge these laws because essentially, you know, they're making it so that this industry is opaque, and anytime they've been exposed, people have been horrified and mortified to have supported these companies. And instead of being duped into supporting them, they should have the ability, we should all have the ability to make a choice, right? And the power of choice, I think, is important. And it shouldn't be something that's taken away from us just so that, you know, these huge corporations can profit. So yeah, I don't like ag laws. I find it to be just suppressive and manipulative. Yes.
What would be the ideal candidate that your organization looks for to do the undercover investigation? Like, what are you looking for in a person to do that?
I get that a lot. You gotta be a specific type of person. It's really rough because if you do undercover work, you're gonna leave from doing undercover work 2 years or maybe even 1 year down the line. It's really rare that you have people that do it for a really long time because it's so draining, it's so taxing. And for me, you know, I have PTSD and I have some psychological after effects from the work that I did. And I also have physical like issues, like my knee and my wrist, my foot, my back, my shoulder. Like these are all, you know, long-term injuries that I have to look at for the rest of my life. And that was just from a couple years of doing undercover work. So you have to be the type of person, I think, to be able to accept that you're going to do this work and probably never be the same. And it will affect you in so many different ways. And then when you're doing the actual work, you're going to have to do standard practice procedure, right? So that involves maybe, you know, not to get too graphic, but it's really painful, like the things that they do to these animals, and that's considered like the norm on farms. And if you're a worker at this place, you have to do it. And for animal advocates, it can be a really hard pill to swallow to think that, you know, I went to these places as a friend to these animals. I was there for them, but I had to look in their eyes, and a lot of my connection with them was colored in this environment where there's a power indifference, and I was in a position of power, and in a way, you know, having to do these standard practices, it hurts them, and investigators have to be a part of that in a way. So that's really rough. Another thing that's super hard about doing undercover work is, um, you know, you have to be a completely different person in so many different ways, and you're just, sometimes I felt like a vessel of myself. Like I was just, I wasn't me in a way, and I had to like put up this wall and this shield, and that was how I lived for, you know, 2 whole years, and it felt like forever. So I usually like talk about all these things because I really want people to understand, like, you're really you're gonna sacrifice a lot of parts of yourself, and you have to be prepared to make those sacrifices and live with that after the fact. But if you can, and you're really determined, those are the kinds of people I think that are suited for undercover investigations. Sorry if I went too long. Yes. That's,
You've seen that, because I know I see it around in some of my people I work with. They, oh, but they're free range, and I'm always like, no.
here's a good example for chicken farming. I like that question because free range, it's really interesting, because now that I think about it, I was going to mention, you know, a lot of chicken farms, they'll say that they're free range, but they'll only let their chickens out for a bit.
Right.
But I won't be the person to say this. We actually, in our latest undercover investigation that we released from the chicken farm in Virginia, we had a Tyson representative say it for us, that free range is nonsense. It doesn't even mean anything, because while our investigator was there, they were able to participate in this conversation with a Tyson representative, where the Tyson rep, they usually have people that come and visit the farms from Tyson corporate and, you know, inspect the chickens, inspect the farm site. Even if the farm site is run down, they're going to do whatever they can to make sure the farm continues to operate, right? Because that's the moneymaker. So they don't go there to penalize the farm. They go there to try to tell them, hey, you need to fix these things, because it's going to affect your yield, which is when they take all the birds out, the weight of the birds, things like that. So that's what really matters, not the welfare for the animals. So anyway, that's the Tyson rep. The Tyson rep is talking to the manager of the farm site, and she essentially says, because the manager was the one who said, you know, I thought, you know, I heard about the free range farms, and, you know, we're not free range here, but yeah, I don't really understand how they can operate those farms, because they're gonna have to go out and get all the chickens, and they're running all over the place. And then she says, you know, those chickens don't go out. Her words. And free range, she says, free range, it's all for publicity. And that's me paraphrasing, but essentially she said it's just advertisement, right? They get the prettiest birds, and these are her words, they get the prettiest birds, and they put them out in the grass, they take some photos, some video, and that's all for advertisement. And then the manager says, well, I thought they had the little bell drinker, and they get and go out and enjoy the sun. They're laughing about it. And then she says, no, you know that they don't go out. So a Tyson representative said that, and it's on our website, like animaloutlook.org. You can go there. I am, you know, this is the reality of how they think about consumers. They don't take, you know, our opinions seriously. They just want to squeeze whatever profit they can out of us. They don't care about, you know, our personal preferences. They don't care about the animals, really. I mean, when it comes down to it, all that matters is money. And that's why, you know, free range, organic, all of those things, I mean, you can hear it straight from the workers. Like,
I always wondered if they did that, put them on there just to make them feel better. But, yeah, and charge more. And I think you're right, it's all about publicity.
yeah, I mean, essentially they're going to do whatever works for them. So for a free range chicken farm, for example, the Tyson rep, these were her words. She says, yeah, they have a door that they can let them go out or whatever, but it's only open for like a couple of hours every day. And that's pretty much it. They're mostly in the sheds. And a free range farm, they'll be in the sheds. Maybe they'll have the door open for, a couple of hours, but they have access to like the tiniest patch of grass. And most of the time they're spending in the sheds. And they're crammed in there and they're gonna pack them in. They're not gonna give them enough space to move because that's less weight when you take your yield and you send your birds off to slaughter. So it's all a business, and that's what I really try to stress as well. It is a business. We hear the phrase family farms. There are some farms that are good, some farms that are bad. It's all, they're there to make money, and that's the truth of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Speak a little bit, if you would, about pasture raised, where the eggs are from chickens who are pasture raised rather than free range. Is it all the same?
Yeah, so pasture raised chickens. I don't tend to speak on things that I don't know too much about, so I'm not going to claim and tell you, here are all the things I know about pasture raised chickens. What I do know is that the industry has a system of how they operate, and it's called vertical integration, right? And if you haven't heard of it, it's essentially a system where they have everything is taken care of. Every process of the animal agriculture system for each specific industry is taken care of in-house, essentially. So they'll have a hatchery where all the birds are hatched. They'll have breeding programs that are within the company, and then they'll hatch the birds and then send them to contract farmers that are contracted to the company. So everything is done in-house. So when it comes to pasture-raised chickens, you have to think of the vertical integration system, and yeah, maybe the conditions for those birds will be different, but essentially the origin of where they're coming from, they're going to have to go through the same experiences because they're going to come from a hatchery. They have to come from somewhere. And in hatcheries, a lot of these day-old newborn chicks are mistreated in so many different ways. And they are left to suffer for, hours and hours on end. And then eventually, if they're deemed, like they're deformed or they're injured within that process of going through all of these conveyor belts and all of this machinery, they're just dumped into what is essentially like this machine that essentially kills them in a really horrible way. And they're not, they don't receive vet care. They're not anesthetized, so they don't receive any pain relief. And that's sort of like their first days of life. So even if they're, I don't know essentially, much about pasture raised chickens, but I do know their start is probably going to be pretty rough, and their end is going to be like way rougher because while they're on the farm site, they're only allowed to live but for so long. And then where are they going to go? They're going to go to a slaughterhouse. And then the conditions there are going to be, it's going to be an excruciatingly horrible experience for them. So this is, I sort of like, when I think about that, I think of the phrase that farmers tend to use where it's just like, they live a happy life and then they have one bad day. And normally that's not the case. It's just, many multiple days, the beginning of their life cycle, the end of their life cycle. At some point, they're going to suffer, and that's unavoidable for animals within that industry. Yes.
Does your group look at the transport of horses to slaughter in Mexico and Canada?
We don't, because we just primarily operate within this country. We primarily...
I mean, like the transport, the sending of them, and going through the auction houses and all that.
Yeah, transport investigations are really difficult because they keep a lot of those things like under wraps when it comes to their routes and things like that and where they go. So it's a really like extensive process to investigate transport trucks. And mostly what Animal Outlook concentrates on is farmed animals. And I know that horses are farmed, of course. But we primarily just focus on most of the major sectors of the animal agriculture industry in this country, which, normally they're going to focus on cows, pigs, chickens, some fish, and maybe even lamb facilities and goats as well. So those are the animals that we mostly focus on. But yeah, I do think that it's a very serious issue. And there are other organizations that focus on that, but mostly with us running on donations to conduct our undercover work, we try to concentrate our efforts to be most effective where we have the most experience and the most ability to be the most impactful.
What about minks? Fur animals used for their fur.
Yeah, I definitely am
Is
aware.
that the farm?
Yeah, it's that's mostly having to do with like fashion, fast fashion and things like that, and clothing. And of course, there are some farms and farmed animals that are going to, like, a lot of their byproducts will go to like clothing and things like that. And if we can document that during an investigation of like a farm site or something like that, that's great, and we'll try to document that. But we mostly just focus on animal products that people are going to consume, and we'll mostly like focus our efforts there. But yeah, mink farming is awful. It's one of the most horrible things I've ever seen.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was really,
Yeah,
really helpful.
thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.
Thank you.